We want to be home. We want to be with our families, want to raise our families in a safe, healthy environment and ensure that they have all the tools they need to save their souls. But now, because that little sphere of the family, that domestic church, that little kingdom is being threatened on all sides, we don't have any other choice but to go out into the public square and defend the social kingship of Christ.
Ross McKnight is back on the team.
I'm Ross McKnight, the co-founder of Nouvelle Vendee, and we're here today to make public reparation to the Sacred Heart in response to offenses against our Lord with this so-called Pride Parade here in Mandeville, Louisiana, a family-friendly Catholic environment.
It's so-called Pride Month right now, June, but really it's the month of the Sacred Heart, and we got to pick a side. Whose team are you on? Ross McKnight's going to be on the show. You might remember him from Backwater, Foie, Gras. He got canceled because of his support and love for the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He lost customers. His family's business was threatened. We're going to have him back on the show today to talk about what he and others are doing to fight back against pride.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
We've had conversations with Ross McKnight before from Backwater, Foie, Gras. In fact, we saw that he and others in Louisiana have basically answered the Pride movement with the Sacred Heart in a new Vendee, and he joins us now to discuss this. Ross, good morning to you. Welcome, and thank you for your time.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me again. Always a pleasure.
Before we jump into this current Pride event, how has business gone for you? Has Backwater Foie Gras gotten back to normal?
I wouldn't say normal. No, it's been an interesting year. We lost those two accounts that were, we'll just say, helpful to have. It's been sustainable. We've had to do a couple of different things, like we started shipping product, and we've made it work. We'll just say that. We've made it work by the grace of God.
What is the new Vendee? Tell me about that.
Sure. So it is a movement to restore the social kingship of Christ, specifically in Louisiana. You probably are very familiar with the story of the Vendee. And so it's interesting. There's some interesting connections between Louisiana and the Vendee. First of all, most of the Cajun families, the original Acadian families, if you will, came from that region of France. And so there are a lot of common surnames there. And also, of course, before the Le Grand Dérangement, or the Great Deportation from what is present-day Nova Scotia or Acadie, there was also a guerrilla war fought, but this time against the British. These people wanted to keep their Catholic traditions, their Catholic faith. They did not, in fact, hate their king. So they fought that war against the British. Beausoleil Broussard, Father Le Loutre, these were two figures that kind of led in that effort. And then eventually they made their way down to Louisiana. And the first thing they did, of course, was to build a church in St. Martinville. And St. Martin of Tours is still, this old historic church that stands in St. Martinville, Louisiana. We've had sort of a slow cultural revolution in Louisiana following, you could probably say that the most marked event would be the Civil War, where the Anglophone influence has been very strong. And so that, along with secular American politics, has, of course, presented itself as a threat to our culture, our way of life, our faith. And the New Vendee is kind of a grassroots movement to restore those things.
Do you think it's fair to say or characterize the Catholic faith in Louisiana as maybe more cultural, more surface than deep anymore? Or how would you describe it?
I would say it's both and. So because it's such an ancient Catholic region, right, hundreds of years, first established by French Catholics, really, that strong, healthy Catholicism there. I'd say there's probably, I don't know if there's anywhere else in the country where you can find as many options for the Latin Mass, for instance. And it's kind of surprising, right? It kind of flies under the radar. Nobody talks about it. But the Latin Mass is alive and well in Louisiana. And then, of course, there's the cultural Catholicism. There's all kinds of people who will call themselves Catholic and support terrible things, right? So that's the issue there is we have, on the one hand, we have very strong Orthodox Catholicism, and then we have the most lax of the lax. Everybody just, is baptized, confirmed, gets married in the Catholic Church because that's the cultural tradition. But that leads to issues, of course, in matters of talking about the faith and evangelization and actually practicing it. That is also why it's a ripe ground for counter-revolution, because it is that spirit's still there, and it can be reawakened in the hearts of many when they remember who they are. And that involves also education on the history of Louisiana, the Catholic history of Louisiana. So that's a portion of the mission also, just reminding people who they are and where they came from.
Tell me about why it was important to do this event in the way that you did, with these men standing there with their flags, praying, and basically forming a line.
We saw this moment as a sort of a test of force, if you will, right? We started aggressively recruiting for this event before the end of April, because we knew that this was sort of a banner moment, a symbolic moment for Louisiana, because Mandeville specifically, it had even recently been named as one of the top places in the country to raise a family, to raise children, right? So it's this family-friendly environment. It's full of children, families, schools, the largest parish for miles around with 6,000 families. And so we knew, like, okay, if Pride is coming here, that's clearly a forward operating offensive. Like, this is something that is direct and calculated, that they're doing it in this area, specifically in this residential area, this family-friendly area, right there on the lakefront, right? It's a park area, really. And they're coming for specifically our children, as we've heard them chant before, right? We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children. So we knew that this had to be our main effort for June, to really show up. So that was the focus there. And yeah, I mean, we wanted to remain prayerful and peaceful. And we had a lot of pressures, I'll just say, some external pressures. And it was necessary that we acquit ourselves perfectly and execute perfectly. And by God's grace, I think we were surrounded by angels that day, and everything went off smoothly.
So no real hecklers in the crowd or anything that would have caused any sort of stress or turmoil?
There was some heckling, and some of it I didn't even see because I was so focused on the group and monitoring things. Luckily, I had the great insulated role, really, of not having to look in that direction, because I was keeping an eye on the men and on the lines and making sure that there weren't any bad interactions. Yeah, apparently there were some nice hand gestures that were going on. Yeah, there was a thing too that we know that they wanted to execute their event in a certain way too. They were calling the parade, for instance, family friendly. They kept using this term, and they used it in the council meeting as well, which is, of course, hilariously ironic. They knew that they had to thread the needle also. I'm not surprised that we didn't have overt violence this year. Next year might be different. I don't know what they're probably planning things differently next year. They probably want a bigger turnout. They probably want to do it on a drier weekend. but
well, it's anyway, Louisiana. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
Do you believe, to that point where you say next year something big might happen? Who knows? Do you think men should be prepared to face that violence? I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, then we shouldn't be there because we don't want the conflict." What would you say?
Yeah, our Lord was willing to face violence, of course, right? And it didn't mean that he was retaliatory, but he was willing to face violence and take with extreme self-discipline whatever was thrown at him. So, of course, certainly an imitation of our Lord. I think that's part of that as well. We have to be willing to accept that violence will be directed towards us. And that could be physical, digital violence, doxing. It could be losing your job. But I think we're at that point where the line in the sand needs to be drawn.
It never ceases to amaze me when I see every June they start corrupting our social media feeds with all of the imagery from these events, these pride events. And it's always debauched, right? It's always gross. It's disgusting. Grown adults, supposedly mature people, and yet they can't seem to figure out that they should have clothes on at a minimum. It seems that we're living in this sort of diabolically confused time where adults can wear no clothing in front of children, and everybody seems to think that that's okay. How would you respond to that?
Well, I just listen to them, right? You can see what they're doing and listen to what they're saying. And they might change the phrase a little bit, to something about, how we just need to be accepting and allow people to live their lives in peace. I've seen that sort of line before. Just let these people live their lives in peace, right? We want to make sure, for instance, another idea that I've heard expressed, we want to make sure that our children feel like they're supported, right, when they come out, that sort of thing. And then, of course, this is followed up by going into the streets, exactly as you mentioned. So we've heard overtly we're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children, but we also hear it put a different way when they try to be diplomatic, which is that we want to be supportive of our children if and when they come out the closet. But they are telling us what they want to do, and then they're showing us what they want to do. So they want to convert children to the cause because their end is death, right? They can't reproduce. So they need to come into our communities where there are children, where there are families, and convert children to their cause in order to replicate themselves. And of course, how do they do this? By dancing in the street, and it seems fun. And it might even seem innocent, like they tried to make the whole thing seem innocent here in Mandeville. But of course, we know what the target is and what the objective is. So it's very clear, right? The messaging's so clear now. And like you mentioned, you can't get away from the imagery anymore. It's like it follows you. They really, really want you to see it. If I just sit back and think about this, it's like, okay, we're no longer at the point where we can choose whether or not to be at war, because the war is against ourselves and our families and our senses. When we go out in public, the war is against our senses also, and it's everywhere. And there's now a pride billboard in my hometown, okay, which I don't know that I ever thought I would ever see in my small Catholic Louisiana hometown. We could say that we don't have a choice but to draw our line in the sand, because you're not going to have anything left to defend if you sit this one out. There's nothing left for you to defend.
But, it's like there is a war here for the children. And it would seem that there's a lot of Catholics that are either numb to that, or they just deny it, or they don't care. They're happy to be complicit in that. Do you see that could change? We need to be as resilient in providing a strong message to our kids as the Pride Parade seems to be to theirs?
Yes. So I think, a stranger put it best, and they were talking about, how the more they read about the Vendee, they realized that these were peasant farmers who were reluctant. They're reluctant to go to war, and they found that they had no other option. And I think that's the point we've reached, is that while we're reluctant to go to war, we want to be home. We want to be with our families, want to raise our families in a safe, healthy environment, and ensure that they have all the tools they need to save their souls. But now, because that little sphere of the family, that domestic church, that little kingdom is being threatened on all sides, we don't have any other choice but to go out into the public square and defend the social kingship of Christ. And that's what's been lacking. I think even you can look at the Second Vatican Council and the quote unquote reforms after that and see that the laity was kind of given this sort of bait and switch in a way. It's like, we're going to make you more involved in the church by giving you weird little roles in the liturgy, right? But what our true role was in the church, especially in the high Middle Ages, is to uphold the temporal sword and to fight for the social kingship of Christ and ensure that all of society is ordered towards the salvation of souls. That's our role. That's where our authority is. And we've seen that if we step away from that role and we step away from that authority and that duty and that responsibility to convert the social institutions to the cause of Christ, then we are losing the battle very rapidly, and it's coming to our very doorsteps.
How hard was it to organize this group and put on an event like this?
It was a challenge. We didn't have the support, I would say, that we should have had from the local church, broadly speaking, the local church, if you know what I mean. So sure. It was a challenge, but there are, like I mentioned, there are enough Catholic men here who hold the traditional faith, who are willing to do something like that. And that was a blessing to see and a great encouragement to see. And also because it was really our first major counter demonstration. We have done them before, but this was our largest effort so far, to see that many men come out and know that next year that might be 3 times that number, right? And the year after that, perhaps 4 or 5 times, 6 times that number. It was very inspiring, and I think that we found our footing.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.